We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Amud Aleph and Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 100a. On the previous Amud, the Mishnah said that if a person has a public thoroughfare that's going through his property, and instead he gives them a path along the side, so whatever he gave to them, he can't get it back, and the public thoroughfare also, it continues to be available for the public. And the Gemara says, why is that the case? The Gemara asked on the previous Amud, he should get the public thoroughfare back for himself because he gave them another path. And the Gemara says, Ravashi says, Kol min hatzad, anytime he's giving them a path along the side, derech akoloson, that already is considered to be a circuitous route. Krova lazeh, rechoka lazeh, since it's along the side, it's closer to this person, but it's farther from that person. In other words, anytime he's going to give a path along the side, that's not really adequate. And so therefore, that's why he does not get that original public path back for himself. And the Rashbam explains, Ravashi says, Masnisan b'chol durachim sheba'olam. Our Mishnah is talking about any kinds of paths, Myri. That's what it's talking about. Hein yisharim, hein akaloson. It doesn't matter if it was a straight path that he gave them. It doesn't matter if it was curving. V'lo mishum gezerin. It's not that there's a decree over here. Ela mishum dekulu hava akaloson, because any path he gives them is considered to be a circuitous route. D'chol derech shenosin mitzad echad shelo hayasham derech tchila yesh b'nei adam shenasis lehem rechoka min harishona. There's going to be somebody who this path is worse for than the original path. V'yeshan asislam kroviyoser. For some people, it'll be a little closer. Delosan ha'omdim be'ir mitzad derech harishon az nasis lehen achshav derech hakaloson. Those who were closer to the first path, this one is further. V'yenor reshus biyado ligzol es harabim. The point of Ravashi is he can't just give them another path that essentially is stealing from the public, which he's not allowed to do. And the Rashbam notes uvein Ravashi l'Rev Zavid lekamidi. Now between the answer of Ravashi and Rev Zavid and the previous sum is no difference. Elachilak taimim kein mashmos darshan ika beinai. Just different reasons that they are giving. And the Rashbam says, Umakshi lakulu. Now the Gemara will ask on all of these opinions. Kevan de takonas chachamim hu. Since this is a takonas chachamim, odinu de shalo lo higio, and we're going to say either it's a takonas chacham or it's a halacha that what he gave he doesn't get that public path back. Imkain lama mashanas anasan, meaning if he's not going to get the original public path for himself, that stays with the public. So why is it that the path that he gives them he gave away? Leimalahu de mekachto. So he should say, I made a mistake. I gave it to you thinking I would get the public path, but I'm obviously not getting that, so let me take the path that I just gave you back. That is the question of the Gemara right now. Again, the Gemara says, V'leimalahu shaklu didchu. Why doesn't he say to them, take back your path, your original, V'havuli didi, and then give me mine, give me the path that I just gave you, what we're calling the derech hakoloson, the one min hatzad, give me that path back. And the Gemara answers to that, Hamani Rabbi Eliezer. The reason why he doesn't get that path back is because who is the author of the Mishnah? The author of the Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabim Sheberu Derech La'atzmam. If they choose a path for themselves, Masheberu Beru, whatever they choose, and so therefore they have now gotten this path that he gave them, and that is now rightfully theirs. And the Rashbam says, Sheberu derech li'atzman, if they choose a path for themselves, derech sada acher, through some other field, masheberu beru, whatever they chose, aval bishalo notlu reshus mibal sada, even though they got no permission from the owner of the field. Uchedemuki lalakaman, the Gemara is going to explain this as we go on, and so therefore, that's why we say again in our Mishnah, whatever he gave them, he gave them. But the Gemara asks, Rabbi Eliezer, Ravim Gazlonim Ninu, but what does that even mean? According to Rabbi Eliezer, the public's allowed to steal? That's something that they're allowed to do. The Rashbam says, Umitaminon atu Ravim Gazlonim Ninu sheyigzelu karka shel acherim, they're allowed to steal other people's land. How can that be? And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Gidel Amar Rav. Rav Gidel says that Rav says, Kegon she'avda lahen derech ba'osasad. The case is where they actually lost a path in that field. That's the only situation where Rabbi Eliezer says they're allowed to keep it. And the Rashbam says, Kishavda lahen derech ba'osasada, they lost a path that was in that field. D'mikol makam urcha islahu gabe. Meaning Rabbi Eliezer was talking about a situation where they did have a path within this person's private property. V'yove koach ravim mikoach yachid, and the strength of the public is greater than the strength of the individual. Sha'yachid shavda lo derech besad chaver. Let's say an individual loses the path that's in the private property of his friend. Lo yivra me'atzmo, he can't just choose himself. Ela o bebezdin, he either has to go to bezdin, or b'reshusa shel ba'al asada, or he has to get permission. Aval ravim kebezdin damu, but a public is considered like a bezdin. Deman minayu mizamin lahai lebeidina, because who's going to take them to the court? Who are you going to take to the court by a rabbin? And the Rashbam says, v'kol shekein masnisan. Now we can apply this certainly to our Mishnah. Once we say that Rabbi Eliezer holds that, let's say they already had a path and then they lose the path, they can take another path. Once Rabbi Eliezer says that's true, so our Mishnah also, where he gives them a path, for sure they can take it. V'kol shekein masnisan du'atzmo nasan, where he gave them the path, umiyu shalo lo higiu, but nevertheless he doesn't get back their original path. and that's a fine against him because he gave them a circuitous route. And so again, that's the reason we're following Rabbi Eliezer over here, and that's why they get the path that he gave to them. And the Gemara continues, now, ihachi, if so, meaning if it's true that they're only allowed to choose a path for themselves in a situation where they lost a path in the same field, so the Gemara now asks, why did Rabba Bar Rav Huna say that Rav said, Ein halacha Rabbi Eliezer, that the halacha is not like Rabbi Eliezer? What the Gemara means to ask is that Rav was presumably saying the halacha is not like Rabbi Eliezer because it doesn't make sense to say that the public is allowed to steal. But now it makes perfect sense what Rabbi Eliezer is saying. If it makes such sense, why should the halacha not be like Rabbi Eliezer? And the Gemara says, Man de masniha lo masniha. The one that had one teaching of Rav, meaning Rav Gidl said that Rav said that the case of Rabbi Eliezer is they lost a path already in that field, so then the halacha actually would be like Rabbi Eliezer. The statement of Rav Bar Rav Huna Amar Rav that the halacha is not like Rabbi Eliezer was not holding like Rav Gidl in the name of Rav, meaning essentially we have a dispute what exactly Rav said. Rav Gidl said that Rav said something that Rabbi Eliezer was completely reasonable. It was talking about Sha'avdal Henderech Ba'osasada, and then we would follow Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabba Bar Rav Huna, he quoted Rav that it was not reasonable what Rabbi Eliezer was saying, and therefore the halacha is not like Rabbi Eliezer. And the Gemara continues, V'taimamai, but what is the reason? And the Rashbam has a slightly different girsa here. Hachi garsinan ula Rabba Bar Rav Huna masnisan taimamai. The Gemara is now asking, okay, according to Rabba Bar Rav Huna, where we're not paskening like Rabbi Eliezer, that's what we're saying Rabba Bar Rav Huna in the name of Rav, so you have to explain the mission according to him. As the Rashbam says, Kevin Damar ein halach, if he's already saying the halach is not like Rabbi Eliezer, that's not reasonable. Lo svirle lo ukme stam masnisan Rabbi Eliezer, wouldn't make sense to say that the stam Mishnah follows Rabbi Eliezer, so we still have to understand what are we going to say according to Rabba Bar Rav Huna. And so the Gemara gives an alternative explanation why it is that the public can keep that path that he gave them, Mishum de Rav Yehuda, because of Rav Yehuda's teaching. The Yom Rav Yehuda, because Rav Yehuda said, Meitzer shechziko bo Rabbim, if you have a boundary line, in those days the separation between one field and another was through a boundary line where it was either raised ground or a little lower ground than the two fields that separated. So if you have such a Meitzer, and there's a chazaka made by the public, so asr lekalkalo, it's asr to ruin that. And the Rashbam explains, shechziko bo Rabbim, that the Rabbim made a chazaka means to say they actually did something. Sheshveyu v'tiknu l'hilach. It was raised a little and then they evened it out. They made it that you can walk there. V'habaylim yodu v'shasku, and the owners knew that they did that and they were quiet. Asr l'kalkal, you can't ruin that. That becomes a path of the public. Devadai l'Rabbim machal. He certainly forgave it over to the public, and that's the reason. V'kol shekein masnisan, certainly by our Mishnah, shenosan lahema hu derech biyadayim, he actively gave them that path. Hilkach ma shenosan nosan, therefore what he gave. Ukagon shechzikun. You have to say according to this answer that they actually do make a chazaka. There's some kind of physical chazaka that the public is making on the land. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Eliezer Rabbim b'mai kanule. Now, according to Rabbi Eliezer, who said that the Rabbim are just beiraru, they just choose for themselves a path and they can take that path. So how do they make a kinyan? And the Gemara says to that, according to Rabbi Eliezer, bihilucha, they do it simply by walking over there. Tanya, as we learned in a brayso, halach bala arko l'rachba, if somebody walks along its length and its width, kana makom hilucha, he does acquire the area where he's walking. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, those are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. The Chachamim Omer, and the Chachamim say, Ein hiluch moel klum ad sheyachzik. Walking alone is not going to work. You have to actually make a chazaka, and so that's what Rabbi Eliezer holds. Again, a chazaka does not necessarily mean a traditional chazaka. It could simply mean walking, according to Rabbi Eliezer. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Lozer. Rabbi Lozer says, my time with Rabbi Eliezer, what's the reason of Rabbi Eliezer? Where does he get this idea that walking is a chazaka? Dechsiv, as it's written in the pasuk by Avram Avinu, Kum hisalech ba'aretz la'arko l'rachba ki l'chatanenu. It says, go and walk the land, the length and the width, because I've given it to you. So you see it's a chazaka. For Rabbanon, but the Rabbanon respond to that, Hasam mishum chavivusa di Avraham hu dekamar le. There, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is just saying it because Avraham is so beloved. It's not actually like a kinyan. Dekamar le hachi, he's saying as follows, Kedei sheyeh noach lichbosh lifnei banav. You should walk the land, that way it will be easy to conquer for your children. And the Rashbam explains, Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Eliezer, Aliba de Rabba Bar Rav Huna, that the Rashbam understands this is Rabbi Eliezer specifically according to Rabba Bar Rav Huna. Diamar ein halacha. Again, Rabba Bar Rav Huna is the one that says the halacha does not follow Rabbi Eliezer. Umuki lo keshalo avdalahem derech. According to Rabba Bar Rav Huna's understanding of Rabbi Eliezer, it's not when the public lost another path. They had no path whatsoever, and they can just choose a path. And we don't paskin like that, but that's what Rabbi Eliezer says. Nevertheless, Rabbi Eliezer says whatever they choose, they choose. Bebira bi'alma below chazaka, they simply choose without a chazaka. So b'mai kanula. So that was the question of the Gemara. How do they make the kinyan? V'chi bedibur kanula, just by speaking, that's enough. Umeshani bihiluch, and the answer is just by walking. The haisha biru hu hahiluch, the choosing is the walking. Uvinyan zeh beiro sam shahalchu l'sham, the fact they walk there, that's going to be the choosing, that's the chazaka. Ad sheyachzik lahashvos karka lecharisha unoal v'gadar uparetz kolshu. Again, the other opinion is you need to have a real chazaka. That means you either plow the land a little bit, or you lock the fence of the land, etc. And the Rashbam continues, Kadeshi Yehi Noach, the reason why, according to the Chachamim, the reason why Avram Avinu walked the land, its length and its width, was in order that it is easy, so to speak, for the children to conquer it, to have Veluhu, Ki Yorshin Velo Kegazlon, and in that way, they'll be like heirs and not like thieves. Velo Yeh Rishus LeSatan Lekatrek, therefore the Satan won't have permission to prosecute. Velo Pischon Peh Lebal Midas Hadin, in that way, there's not going to be a judgment, so to speak, against Klal Yisrael for taking the land. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina says, Modim Chachamim Rabbi Eliezer, the Chachamim would admit to Rabbi Eliezer, Bishvil Shal Kramim, let's say you have a path through a vineyard, so there, Hoel V'nasa Lehilach, since that's made for walking, that's the whole purpose of the path, so Nikna Behilach. So then let's say somebody would sell someone else a path in his vineyard, simply walking there will be considered a chazaka. There even the Chachamim will agree that walking is a chazaka. And the Gemara continues, Kiyasu L'kami de Rabbi Yitzchak Barami, when they came before Rabbi Yitzchak Barami, there was such a case of acquiring a path in a vineyard. Amar Lui said to them, Havu le kihechi de dori tuna de shavishta v'hadar. Give him a path that's wide enough that he can carry a load of vine branches and he can turn around. That's how wide the path has to be. And the Gemara says, V'lo Amar, now that's only true ela de mesayim mechitzasa, if you have walls over there, if you have some kind of mechitza. Avalo mesayim mechitzasa, but if there's no walls, so then there's no problem. It will be easy for him to turn around. So then all he needs is enough space, kihechi de shakal kara umonach kara, just enough space in order to be able to walk one leg in front of the other in terms of the space for the load that's not needed if there are no walls surrounding the path. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Derech HaYachid, a path for an individual, Dalet Amos, that's 4 amos wide. And the Gemara says, Tana was taught, Acherim Omrim, others say, Kedei Sheyavor Chamor B'maso. A Derech HaYachid has to be enough space that a donkey can pass with its load. Amar Rav Huna says, Halacha Ka'acherim, the halacha is like the Acherim. Dayane Gola Omrim, the Dayane Gola, they say, Shnei Gamodim Umechsa. Derech HaYachid has to be 2.5 amos. Some say that Shnei Gamodim Umechsa means 2.5 of the smaller kind of amos. V'Amar Rav Huna, and Rav Huna says, Halacha Kedayane Gola, the halacha is like the Dayane Gola. The Gemara says, how could that be? V'Amar Rav Huna halacha ka'acherim. Didn't Rav Huna say the halacha is like the acherim, that it's enough space for the chamor, for the donkey to pass with its load? And the Gemara says to that, Idi v'idi chad shiuru. That's actually the same exact measurement. The amount of space for the donkey to pass with its load is in fact shnei gamadim umechza. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Derech harabim sheishes reyama. The path for the public is 16 amos wide. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Derech hayachid arba amos. A path for an individual is 4 amos. Derech me'ir le'ir, a path from one city to the other, shmona amos, that's 8 amos wide. The idea being essentially a path wide enough for people to go in 2 directions. This is talking about a road that's specifically taken from one city to another city, from the residents of both of those cities. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Amud Beis.